everyone, and welcome back to Market Insights Travel Edition. Today I have Ash, an analyst in our team, with me, and he'll be delving into some of his insights from his recent travels to South Korea. So Ash, what were some high-level and key takeaways that you took away from your trip?
Thanks, Karina. So I spent most of my time in Seoul. I was pleasantly surprised at how developed the city is. The infrastructure is fantastic. The roads are very clean, and the city is very organized. I think it's comparable with some of the big mega cities that we're familiar with in Europe and in the USA.
That sounds incredible, nice. So a common concern around South Korea has been structurally low earnings growth, demographic headwinds, and corporate governance challenges. Can you maybe delve into these and give us some experiences that you had on the ground?
Yes, Karina, I think the point you make on earnings is very important. So earnings have barely grown since 2018. Um, Returns are also relatively low compared to the MSCI EM index, and there is a structurally challenged demographic situation in Korea. The population is declining. The fertility rate is 0.72 births per female, and of course you need two or more times fertility rate in order to just sustain or grow your population. And as a result, the dependency ratio is increasing, which means that your working age population is declining relative to your retirees, and therefore there's more of a structural burden on the government to fund pensions going forward.
So there's been a lot of attention on the recent election and the government's Value Up program. Do you see these as potential catalysts for the issues that we mentioned in the last question?
Yes, Karina, I think that is very important. The Korean election was the most important topic of discussion in my meetings and in the corridors of the conference that I attended. I think to give some background, this presidential election, which happened on the 3rd of June, is significant for the reason that the president in South Korea has got significant independent authority. The president appoints the cabinet as well as judges and key people in economic bodies, as well as national and foreign policy. The president has the ability to veto decisions of the National Assembly, and the National Assembly can only override those vetoes with two-thirds majority. So now the Democratic Party controls both the presidency as well as the National Assembly, and therefore the policy uncertainty has reduced, and there will be more impetus to drive the policy reforms which have been promised by the president. The important difference between the previous Value Up program, which we're familiar with, and now the Boost Up program, which is the name the new president, J.M. Lee, has given to his reform agenda, revolves around the fact that most of the reform is mandatory in nature, and there's a legislative underpinning where the Corporate Act has been amended in June. And some of the key reforms around the Corporate Act amendment include changing the fiduciary duty of executives on boards to act in the interests of all shareholders rather than just the interests of the entity. There's also the introduction of cumulative voting, which protects minority interests and allows minorities to introduce board representation. There's also a big shift and a big push to try to reform the way that treasury shares are handled in Korea, whereas previously they shares that were bought back were placed in treasury rather than cancelled. So those are the main reforms.
So the Korean index was up around 10% over the last 12 months, in comparison to some Korean shares that are up 60 to 80% over a similar time period. So our emerging market fund benefited by selectively choosing to buy shares instead of buying an ETF. Can you maybe give us your thoughts on this?
Sure, Karina. So I think, first of all, for some context, if you had bought the iShares MSCI ETF tracker for Korea, you would have returned approximately 15%, whereas if you had selectively chosen banking stocks, for example, you would have significantly outperformed an ETF. So I think we realized very early on that some of the financial stocks in particular were looking very attractive, trading less than 1 times price to book, and in many cases at 0.5 times price to book. And these are still sound companies with strong balance sheets, and we took the opportunity to top up our positions going into the announcement of the Value Up, and then again on the announcement of the Boost Up program. And subsequently, a lot of these stocks have run very hard, as you've correctly pointed out, and we've taken the opportunity to trim positions in some of these stocks. And I think one of the reasons behind this is, despite all of the positive reform and the positive sentiment which I've talked about around the Boost Up program, there are some concerns which we're watching quite closely, which is potentially underappreciated by the market. And this refers to the fact that President J.M. Lee and his Democratic Party lean slightly left and slightly socialist in some of the policies which he's talked about. Some of these policies include regulating multi-home ownership, increasing corporate tax rates, as well as tax rates on high income earners. And some of these issues will come to the fore in the next little while, where we'll get more clarity around how this is going to impact the economy and how it's going to impact some of the shares that we hold in the portfolio. So we've taken the opportunity to trim some exposure from some of these stocks which have done very well in a short space of time, and understand that there may be some headwinds on the horizon which we continue to watch closely. Nonetheless, if you look at the KOSPI or Korean index relative to the MSCI EM index, the price to earnings ratio is still relatively depressed for the Korean market relative to the EM market. So with that said, there still are opportunities in this market, and we remain very selective in the stocks that we add to the portfolio.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ash. It'll be really interesting to see how these political themes play out over the next few months. Thank you to the audience for tuning in to another episode of Market Insights Travel Edition. We look forward to seeing you in following episodes.